Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Extra Milestone, your weekly film anniversary podcast, where we take a trip to the past to discover the classic films that have made the cinematic landscape what it is today. I am your host, as always, Sam Noland, contributor to Cinemaholics and guy who does this show every week. That's probably what I'm most prominently known for at this point. And I am joined once again, returning to Extra Milestone, my personal friend, and just an all-around swell guy and all-around cinephile. It is Rob Wilkinson. How's it going, Rob?
Going good. Thanks for having me back.
Of course, I was glad to. And you know, when I saw that this movie that we're going to be talking about, when I saw that it was coming up, you were possibly the first person that came into my head for a variety of reasons. One of them being that you're one of the most knowledgeable individuals I know when it comes to Oscar history. And this movie is a very, very notable sort of hallmark of that for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into. There's no use prolonging it any further. We are going to talk all about Eve. You see what I did there?
I did.
Yeah.
Honored members, ladies and gentlemen, for distinguished achievement in the theater, the Sarah Siddons Award to Miss Eve Harry.
I'm going to take you to Margot. Oh, no. Oh, yes, she's got to meet you.
She's quite a girl, this what's her name?
Eve. I'd forgotten they grew that way. I take it she read well.
It wasn't a reading, it was a performance. Brilliant, vivid, something made of music and fire.
How nice.
After all you've said, don't you know that part was written for Margot?
It might have been 15 years ago. It's my part now.
You're quite a girl.
You think?
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
You do all that just for a part in a play.
I'd do much more for a part that good.
Why do they always look like unhappy rabbits?
Because that's what they are. Don't make him happier.
There never was, and there never will be another like you.
All About Eve was released in October of 1950 and features an all-star cast and was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is it the most nominated film in Academy Award history?
It is tied for the most nominations.
Do you know what the other ones are?
Yes, I do. Titanic and recently La La Land.
Oh, really? And it's 14 nominations, correct?
14 nominations.
I'm wondering, is it the one? Because I think it won how many of them? Was it 6? Am I remembering that correct? Yep. So is that the most of those 3?
Well, no, Titanic.
Okay. Oh, right.
Titanic is tied for the most wins.
Yeah, because it got 11, right?
Yep.
Man, it's weird that I kind of know this stuff, but also not. So that was a little indicator of my entire knowledge base. But yeah, this movie is it received 5 acting nominations, right?
Yes.
Or is it? Yeah. So 2 for best lead actress, 2 for supporting actress, and 1 for supporting actor. Of which, do you know how many they won for that?
Only 1 supporting actor,
and it was George Sanders.
Yep,
who has one of the greatest voices I've ever heard. It's like,
I know.
It's like young Orson Welles, just like to the 10th power.
It's just a really firm voice, you know?
Yeah. The kind of voice that you would want like to be narrating a museum exhibit about you after you die. I know that's a really morbid place to go, but for some reason that's the first thing that came into my head, is that if there's a museum exhibit dedicated to someone, I would want George Sanders' voice to be the one narrating it. And as a matter of fact, it is that very voice which opens the movie. Now, it starts out at an award ceremony, which, as we find out, actually is kind of the end of the story chronologically, or almost the end anyway.
Yeah.
And it's where a young actress, Eve Harrington, is winning an award. And what was the name of the award? The Sarah Siddons Award?
Sarah Siddons Award.
Siddons. Which is an award for acting in the theater, on stage. And this is a movie very much centering around sort of the theater life. And I think it's one of the very best. I think if in case it was unclear, this is like one of the best movies, is it not?
It absolutely is. This has got to be one of my favorite just best picture winners.
Yeah. Because it's in addition to all those acting nominations and everything, it did end up winning Best Picture and Director, a handful of technical awards, and goddamn did it deserve it. This thing still holds up remarkably well today. I first saw it in late 2015. I can't remember exactly when, but it was around there. And I seem to recall that it was like expiring off of Netflix or something. And it was one that I had heard about and thought, I might as well watch it. And I remember liking it, but I guess probably just because of how young I was, or how much I was paying attention, it just did not hit me in the way that it did when I rewatched it earlier today. Within minutes, I was like really captivated.
Yeah. The first time I saw this, it had to have been midway through college. And I'm pretty sure I got to it just because, Best Picture winner, won a bunch of awards. And so that was just at the top of my list.
Right.
And I did really enjoy it the first time, but it's been with each repeat viewing that I enjoy it more and more, that it's made it a favorite of mine.
Nice. So how many times would you say that you've seen it by now?
This has to be at least 5th, maybe 6th.
Goodness
I
gracious.
actually started off the year with this movie. It was the first movie I watched of 2020.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Even more serendipity when it comes to this episode.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear that it only gains traction over time. So I'll be honest, I kind of I'm thinking about watching it again right after this episode, like before the Amazon rental expires, because man, this thing is rich with character. I found out a few things about sort of the behind the scenes that I wanted to let everyone know. So it does star Bette Davis in the lead role or co-lead, I should say, as Margot Channing, who is a Broadway actress who is very successful, very acclaimed, very popular among the New York theater circuit, and is starting to maybe decline a little bit because she's at the ripe old age of 40 years old.
Yeah, at that point, your career is pretty much done.
Especially if you're a woman, and that's kind of one of the big things with this movie is the way that. And I actually talked about this a few weeks ago, and this is a movie that I imagine we'll be bringing up on a number of occasions. I did an extra milestone with my friend Emily Kubin-Kanik about Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard. And that was another movie about the way that actresses in particular have especially at this time, when cinema was just starting out and it was like the 40s and 50s and stuff, there was kind of a few very specific types of characters they could play, and it mostly had to do with their age. You know what I'm saying? They could either play the young ingenue, the Eves, so to speak, or they could play a little bit older, their star is falling a little bit, or they were just in air quotes, an old lady. And that's kind of it. Whereas men of all ages can play all different kinds of roles. There's a very clear delineation on the other side.
Yeah, it's really terrible that it's been like that for actresses, that after so long, it's just like, well, now the opportunities are going away. But for men, it's just always constant. When I was preparing for this episode, I read a little bit of Roger Ebert's review of this. He gave it 4 out of 4 stars, by the way.
Naturally.
And one thing stood out to me in it. He said the best thing that Bette Davis did for her career was age. And I thought that was interesting because this movie is kind of like an embracing of that, of like, yes, she is getting older, but she's still got it, is kind of what's trying to be said here.
And I think, and just to sort of jump ahead to like the actual function of the movie and stuff, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's the way that you can tell that Bette Davis understands what it's like to be this person. Actually, I'm not actually aware. I really should have done the research. Do you know if she was just a film actress or did she work in the theater as well?
I'm fairly certain she was in the theater at some point. I feel bad that I don't know this one off the top of my head either.
I'm looking it up now. She did appear in Broadway plays earlier in her career, in like the 30s and stuff, and then slowly transitioned to film. And
that certainly was how a lot of actors got started back in this time for film, that as they show in the film of, oh, now I'm talking to a producer about a film in Hollywood. Like this was how a lot of them would just get plucked out.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that this is, although cinema had been around for a very long time, like almost 70 years at this point, there was still a lot of adjustment that was kind of still being done. It had been mostly taken care of, but I think yet another connection to Sunset Boulevard. In 1928, there was kind of just this hard transition from silent to sound cinema, and that actually proved really difficult for a lot of actors, particularly because they were naturally suited for silent cinema because of the gesticulation and the theatricality of the performances they were used to giving. And now with sound, they have to kind of develop a new way of acting. And Mary Pickford is often credited as sort of pioneering film acting, like acting specifically that could only be done in film. And so you see this a lot with, and I love the sort of comparing this movie to Sunset Boulevard in the way that it is the theater side of things. And while it's a similar story, the details are very different.
Yeah, I actually wrote that note down as I was watching it. That it's interesting that both of them had this kind of, oh, Hollywood's terrible narrative, and they are both about actresses in these fields aging and not being relevant anymore. But they go about them in very different ways.
I think you're right. And it hit me. I can't remember the exact scene, but about halfway through the movie, it kind of clicked into place what sort of the key difference, not only in the way these two movies are constructed, but kind of the fundamental difference between theater and film. Like if you really boil it down, theater is personal. It's visceral. It's tactical. You are there watching a performance take place that will only happen one time. With film, you're kind of seeing something that has been distributed out everywhere, that has been produced, that has been run through committees and stuff. And not that doesn't happen with theater, but film is definitely more of a business. You watch Sunset Boulevard, you get the sense that although the characters who are sidelining Norma Desmond, Gloria Swanson in that movie, they're not unmalicious, but they're kind of just, doing their job. It's just business as usual. This movie is savage.
Yes.
It's one of the most savage movies I've ever seen. The insults in this are out of this world.
Yeah, it's a wild movie. I love that memorable line, "Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy night."
Oh my goodness.
Like,
The jabs that Betty Davis has in this movie, sometimes without even talking. The first thing we in that award ceremony, in the first scene, that's when we first see Betty Davis, and she has this glare that could like disrupt the San Andreas fault. It's crazy, the death glare that Betty Davis has. And what ends up happening is we flash back from that award ceremony and we see how it all came to be, where again, like I said, Margot Channing is a very successful actress, and she is currently doing a run of performances of what was the play's name? Aged in Wood.
Aged in Wood, yeah.
And a very successful play. And as it turns out, she has a fan, Eve Harrington, played by Ann Baxter, who one night is just sort of like skulking around outside of her dressing room, and is discovered.
I think it's important to note that she's been skulking around for several performances now, that she's been there every night just waiting for Margot to go in and go out of the theater.
Mm-hmm. It's across multiple states, if I remember correctly. Like, yes. This has been a long pursuit that takes place, and it's sort of informs a question that I want to ask about the Eve character. But just to sort of set the groundwork, she is welcomed into Margot's dressing room with her and a bunch of her theater advisors and assistants and stuff, and tells her story, like, of how I grew up poor in Wisconsin, and my husband died in World War II, and I just love the theater, and I've always loved to act and play pretend and stuff. And she's soon taken under the wing of Margot, and very quickly proceeds to very insidiously and eventually just downright straightforwardly undermine the very career and livelihood of not only Margot Channing's professional life, but her personal life as well. And that's kind of it. Is just the whole story of, it's kind of like A Star Is Born, except the star is forcefully being birthed. Yeah, exactly. Here's something I got to thinking about. So there's a lot of narration in this movie. Like I said, George Sanders narrates part of it. We also get a lot of narration, sort of a lot of context being put in place by Karen Richards, played by Celeste Holm, who was also nominated for an Oscar for this. Mm-hmm. And she narrates a lot of it. We never, unless I'm forgetting something, we never get any narration from Eve, right?
Yes, we don't get any narration from her.
So what I'm curious about, and I think, and maybe it's fairly obvious, but I'm just, I'm just sort of wondering here. Do you think it was Eve's intention to maliciously undermine Margot from the very beginning, or did that sort of emerge as time went on? Like, did she have malicious intent from the very beginning, or did it just sort of naturally come about that way? Do you have a thought on that at all?
I absolutely have a thought on that. She intended to undermine her from the start.
Okay. That's what I thought. I think the movie makes it fairly clear, but I think there's also potentially a way of looking at this, saying like, well, maybe it's just the way of things, but I think you are right. There are ways to go about this without destroying the life of the person you're sort of looking up to, or at least pretending to look up to. So,
and I think really the last 30 minutes says it all, of like sums up that answer, that it was her intent from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want me to get into that now, or if we're skipping too far ahead.
No, we can jump around. It's fine. I think we're gonna be talking about the entire plot of this movie. So sometimes we do spoilers, sometimes we don't. If you haven't seen All About Eve, then by all means check it out, because we're gonna get into it here.
Yeah. So when Addison confronts her towards the end about all her lies and, oh, you need to go out there and give your best performance, like, that's when he really dresses her down and goes, your name's not even really Eve Harrington.
Yeah.
And basically everything you've ever said is a lie.
Yeah.
And
not even a widow.
Yeah. And that, first of all, was just, okay, so she was malicious from the start. She just came in with that sob story, and just to make sure that they got her attention and that they felt bad for her and wanted to help her out. Yeah. And then just worked her way in. But then at the very end, we get Phoebe,
right,
who was hiding out in Eve's hotel room waiting for her to get back. And we see that Phoebe is just a young Eve, that she's ambitious and wants to be like her and imitates her in just the little bit that we see of her.
Yeah. And we see that the cycle is just starting all over again. I want to get back to that in just a second, but first I just want to address the way the final 30 minutes sort of culminates, which is that, as I said earlier, we do get to see the conclusion of the opening scene, which is the award ceremony. And what I love is that now we see it in a completely different light. We see that all of this sincerity, all of this gratitude that Eve is displaying is completely artificial and is just sort of trying to save face. You know what I'm saying? So I love the way I've talked about this before, about the phenomenon of sort of taking a scene from like the middle or the end of a movie and then placing it at the beginning, and how a lot of times it can be obnoxious. This is definitely one of the times that it works because of that contrast of how we see it. So I do love that.
Yeah, I'm also really against just like flash forwards as a way to start your movie, because it can really just be a cheap way to grab attention and then not really have a point to it. But yeah, when we come back to the scene at the end, we have a completely different understanding, and there's so much more weight to it. A movie I saw earlier this year that I'd also recommend for doing something similar. They start off with a scene just kind of in a diner at the train station, and it's just this really brief conversation, but you find out at the end these two people have had this romantic affair for the past couple of weeks, and this is the last time that you're going to see them, and that they're going to see each other. And one of them goes off on the train, and when you get to that scene, it just has so much more behind it, and it's great when you have a film that can build up to this.
What is the movie you're talking about?
Brief Encounter from 1945.
Oh, I thought you were talking about like a new release. I'm like, no. What movie came out this year that has that? That sounds awesome. No, Brief Encounter slaps. That actually is celebrating an anniversary soon, so we probably won't do that within the next couple of weeks. But it was released in a different country in 1946, so we will end up getting to that. So it's good to know that you're a fan of that. I'll pencil you in for Brief Encounter, Rob.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a David Lean movie too. So you know what? Tell me this. And this is a bit of a tangent, but here's a movie that does that exact thing, where it has a scene from the end that they show at the beginning, and then we see it completely differently when we actually get to it. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but Mission Impossible 3 does the exact same thing.
Okay.
And I think it works really well there, honestly.
So this might shock you. I have not seen a single Mission Impossible movie.
Hot take. I think the third one's the best. So partially just because of that, for that reason, that it makes the villain really menacing in a way that almost none of them are. But that's a discussion for another time. So I just want to throw that out there into the film ether. That we will not be covering Mission Impossible 3 on Extra Milestone. So don't ask.
All right. And speaking of villains, to tie it all back.
That's right.
On the AFI's 100 Heroes and Villains list, Eve Harrington got number 23 on the villains list.
No. Oh, that is awesome. I love that they're just flat out willing to call her a villain, because I've heard, and it's not prolific by any means, but I've heard a small handful of takes that maybe Eve is like a misunderstood protagonist of this movie, and I'm like, no, you bite your tongue. I don't think you can feel anything but sympathy for Margot, but in contrast, anything but contempt for Eve. This is some malicious, manipulative stuff. And actually, I wanted to tie it back to the very ending, where we see Phoebe sort of insinuate that maybe the cycle is just going to repeat.
Yeah.
I started thinking, is this maybe some sort of karmic revenge, even beyond just the way that history repeats itself? Because I'm thinking, how long of a time period does this movie take place over? It can't be more than a few months, right?
Yeah, no, I always figured it was about like a year max.
Yeah, maybe so. So even if that's the case, we find out that Eve is like maybe in her mid-20s. If her, if she's becoming Margot and her Eve is entering her life this early, maybe it's some sort of justice saying, like, we will allow you the spotlight, but not for nearly as long as you deserve it. So we're just going to cut right to the chase with that. So I'm wondering if maybe that's some sort of, strange justice at the end of that movie. Have you ever considered anything along those lines?
Well, I haven't really ever thought of it in that way. I've kind of thought of it more as there's always going to be that girl that's ambitious enough to go for it. And so even if she becomes the star or the award winner, then she has to be looking out for the next her.
Right. My point is that it happens so soon, so early in her career, that maybe it's like some sort of karmic thing that the movie is exerting upon Eve, as implying that justice will be served beyond the end credits. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess I've just never thought of it that way before.
I might be reading into it, but I just think it's interesting to note sort of the discrepancy in age and the way that their star starts to be undermined at.
Oh yeah, definitely happening much faster.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit, and I was going to mention this earlier. I think I got sidetracked, but such is the nature of Extra Milestone. I love the way that it handles Bette Davis's character of Margot, because she is the lead for all intents and purposes, along with Eve. But it's really Margot's story that we're meant to sympathize with and follow along. And what I love is the way that Eve starts to turn all of her friends and pseudo theater family and stuff against her in such a way that she's kind of completely helpless against. Like, what can she even do? How can she even object to this? Margot, I mean, how can she even say, like, listen, I'm not getting as much attention as I used to, and now I'm upset about it? Like, how can she communicate that without seeming like, she just wants attention and nothing else? Because obviously we know, because we can relate to this, that this is actually a very, effed up thing that's happening to her. But it's very clear to see how to the characters around her that, they would just think that she's overreacting. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't really think there is a way she could have approached that where it doesn't come off as cruel. And throughout the movie, they're all talking about, like, oh, you're always so mean, Margot. How can you say that about her? Like, if she does try to voice her concerns, she's just labeled as a whiner.
Exactly. I think if this movie were made today, the characters would be telling Margot that she's getting, quote, too emotional. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a common turn of phrase that we're familiar with nowadays. So it's clear to see, like, this thing is really universal in just the way that it understands that story of, just losing relevance in general, and how much it sucks, especially when it's a conscious effort on someone else's part. So it's a really, really engaging story in that way. And it actually sort of mirrors a little bit of Betty Davis's story of how she came to this movie. I found out in doing a little bit of research, she was like really close to not being in this movie. Someone else was cast, and they were just about to get started on production before. And I'm looking it up right now. It was Claudette Colbert.
I was about to say, yeah,
was cast in the lead role and then got an injury like right before filming began. So we almost didn't get Betty Davis, and I think it's a damn good thing that we did. Of course, I hope Claudette Colbert was okay, not to insinuate anything. But
and I did write down somewhere, some of the other actresses that were considered for the role.
Let's hear it.
Just a few: Katharine Hepburn, Barbara Stanwyck, and Vivian Leigh.
Yeah. Which I could see all of them. I could see the way that they could sort of make the character their own with those, with their unique personalities. Katharine Hepburn, especially, I think would have been a hell of a Margot Channing. But there's something about just Betty Davis's way of what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of her abrasiveness.
Yes,
that comes across really well while also being really sympathetic. I think it's magnificent.
Yeah, I think any of these other actresses would have been great for the role, but they would have all come across very differently. And Betty Davis just makes it her part. Like it's just one of the roles that I think of when I think of Betty Davis.
Yeah. I'm trying to, cause she did not win the Academy Award. I'm looking up, do you know who did?
Yes, it was for Born Yesterday, Judy Holliday.
Ah, yes, that movie.
Yes, which an interesting thing about that, I think that was an instance of just split vote at the Oscars. Because if you look, you had Betty Davis and Baxter for this movie,
right,
and then Gloria Swanson for Sunset Boulevard.
Any one of those three,
and so
would have been perfect
because they were all such strong contenders. They split the vote, and then Born Yesterday just snuck in there and got it.
Weird. Yeah, it looks like Born Yesterday was also nominated for Best Picture, as was Sunset Boulevard and Father of the Bride, which is a damn good movie. But that's a bit of a tangent. And actually, I also found out that, and this kind of informs a little bit of Margot's sort of bitterness, I think, is that Betty Davis had just recently, before this movie got going, severed ties with Warner Brothers, who she had been like under contract with and stuff. This is a 20th Century Fox movie, and so there's definitely Betty Davis was not one to make compromises and undermine herself. So I think that's really funny. Matter of fact, she scared Marilyn Monroe on the set of this movie. In the scene in the lobby with George Sanders, apparently at one point Betty Davis like snapped at her or something, and Marilyn Monroe, who is almost unknown at this point, went off and like threw up.
Yeah, that sounds right. I didn't come across that particular story, but I did hear about behind the scenes, a lot of the cast was just frustrated at Marilyn Monroe because she did keep messing up her lines.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
She's not even in the movie that much, so...
Yeah, she's got, I think, 2 scenes, right?
Yeah. It's something like that, 2 or 3 anyway. But yeah, this is one of her very earliest roles, so it is nice to see her in it.
Oh, yeah.
I want to real quick, just before I forget, I want to give a shout out to... or just address, I should say, that this is actually based on a short story, The Wisdom of Eve, by Mary Orr, who was not given screen credit for some stupid reason. So shame on you, Joseph L. Mankiewicz. But evidently that story was itself based on kind of a different story that Mary Orr had heard. So this is very much coming from a genuine place where this happens a lot in the show business as a whole.
Yeah, and I think kind of like Sunset Boulevard, that while it's fictional, there's truth to it.
Yeah. Right down to the characters, sort of, it seems like they could be playing a version of themselves.
Yes.
With the exception of George Sanders, who, as far as I know, was not a scathing Broadway critic. But I would believe it if he was, because What a commanding presence that man has. A fun fact, and this has nothing to do with anything. George Sanders was the first live action Mr. Freeze. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah. In the 1966 Batman TV series, George Sanders played Mr. Freeze, a very different version of the character. So sorry, Arnold, you were not the first one there. And actually, funnily enough, I've been watching the 60s Batman show recently.
Yeah.
In the very next episode, guess who plays a villain named Zelda the Great?
Who?
Ann Baxter.
Oh.
They had 2 All About Eve alumnus in a row. As far as I know, they were the only 2 cast members to appear on 1966 Batman, but that's awesome, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I love that. So yeah, I think we've said a lot. Did you have anything else that you wanted to address on All About Eve? Because obviously we could go on for a very long time, but just any other big things?
One thing I do want to add, just because I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've just never connected this before, but remember Birdie?
Thelma Ritter.
Yes. She's in Rear Window playing a kind of similar smart-mouthed
like a personal assistant. Yeah, I was like, where do I recognize her from? And not only her face, but this specific character. It was Rear Window, which incidentally, her character in Rear Window, along with, what was the other lead in Rear Window? Jimmy Stewart.
Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly, that's right. Grace Kelly and Thelma Ritter were sort of one character bifurcated into 2 from the original short story. So that's always a fun thing to bring up.
Yeah.
Rear Window, covered on Extra Milestone last year. That episode's still up. On the same bill as On the Waterfront. Did that one with Will Ashton, so that's fun. A lot of 50s synergy.
I did have one more thing I wanted to mention. So it's Christmas 2019. I've worked a long day at Alamo Draft House.
Right.
Running
where
on
we
the
both
busiest
work.
day of the year. Yeah. We both were very busy that day.
Christmas was ludicrous. Are you talking about Christmas Day?
Yeah, Christmas Day.
Oh my gosh. That is one of the worst days of my life.
Oh man.
Not even kidding.
Wow.
Oh my.
Well, after the long hours, I get home, finally open Christmas presents, sun's gone down, and I get a copy of All About Eve, the Criterion release.
Oh, that's
just
awesome.
like I've wanted.
Nice.
And I go and open it, and it's very strange because they've never done this on packaging since this.
For a second, I thought you were going to say that like a different disc was in there. Like I open it and it's Armageddon.
Okay, don't joke about that. That's an actual thing that happens. But
oh yeah, I know.
But instead of, like those plastic studs that you put your disc in a DVD case like you normally would, there's these black putty things.
What?
Like, I'll have to send you a picture after this, but I've never seen them on any case before. And they're kind of sticky, so
are they on the disc itself?
No, like it's the nub that you put the disc on, which also I have a really hard time getting it on there.
I know exactly. Stamp. I have a few like that too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh my gosh! So the booklet is in there, and it's stuck up against these. And the first time I go and open it, it damages the cover on the booklet.
Oh no! Criterion.
What are you doing?
You were doing so well. What's wrong with the plastic?
Yeah, and the 3 movies that I've gotten since this one on the spine codes, they're back to just the plastic.
Really?
Yeah.
So they got so many angry letters that they just discontinued it immediately. I remember on the Criterion Facebook page, I don't remember if it was the exact same thing or something like it, but there was something with the huge Godzilla box set that was like their 1000th title that had just a ton of complaints that there was like something screwing up the discs inside of it, like something physically warping it.
Ah, that ain't good. I hadn't heard about
It's been
that.
a good system for like 25 years. What happened? There's no need to innovate movie cases anymore.
Criterion. We just care about the content, not the
That's
case.
Right.
Keep
Exactly.
the case the same.
Oh my, as much as I love the cover art, which I would never dispense with that, but seriously,
man.
when it comes to the actual mechanism of holding the disc itself, I think they've just about figured it out as best they can.
I heard, and I don't know if this is true because I don't have the copy yet, but the Parasite release, they included an extra slot in there for if you already have it, you can put your Blu-ray or DVD.
Oh, really?
In addition to the Criterion release.
That's cool. Yeah, I bet a bunch of people do have it on Blu-ray. Heck, I have it,
do.
So yeah, there you go.
And it's at the top of my Criterion wish list right now.
Oh, I gotta get that thing. Listeners, if you want to give us a Christmas present, send us Parasite on Criterion.
Oh yes, please.
We will not disclose any address, but figure it out.
I will take multiple copies, so don't feel discouraged and think that somebody's already sent it. You go ahead and do it.
Oh, very nice. But yeah, of course, we could go on for a long time, but this movie is great. It's one of the very best, I think, that has now been solidified with the second viewing. And honestly, I think I probably will end up watching it again before the day is up.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna watch it again sometime soon.
Yeah. So just really great movie about
Eve.
About Eve. There you go. All about Eve. Yeah, just the way that that people can prey upon others and how much that sucks. And it's like not a fun story. It's not kind of just the exciting journey that I thought it was before seeing it. It's a very savage movie. You'll love the insults in it. Like that's kind of my favorite part is just the brilliant writing. I would love to just sort of quote lines for the next 15 minutes. But yeah, it's a really, really great one. So, Robert, I want to thank you for joining me on Extra Milestone. Once again, I had a great time.
Thank you for having me again. I was happy to be back.
Of course. And I hope that we can do it again someday. Until such time as that happens, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you on the World Wide Web?
Best place, you can find me on Letterboxd. I post reviews pretty regularly. I'll be under Film Ace Rob.
Very nice. And is that your Twitter handle as well?
Yep.
Very nice. And so I will not sign off yet because we have a second segment to this episode, but I guess we'll get to that in 1 second. And we're back. For you, listener, that was only a nanosecond, but for me, it was several hours. I was going to say an eternity, but I don't know what that was about. And joining me for the second half of the episode is one of my very good friends, an old chum, and a longtime collaborator. It is my co-host from Anyway, That's All I Got, Anthony Battaglia. Welcome back, Anthony.
Thanks for having me back. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is this is the second movie that's being discussed in this episode, and when I saw that this one was coming up, I say this to a lot of guests, but I have a lot of friends that like specific things, and when I saw that this movie was coming up, I recalled instantaneously that this movie, we kind of have an interesting connection with it, and so I thought it would be who better than Anthony to talk about Rebel Without a Cause.
You know what kind of drunken brawls those parties turn into. It's no place for kids.
A minute ago, you said you didn't care if he drinks.
He said a little drink.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Girls don't love their father. Since when? Since I got to be 16?
Stop that!
I love you, Jim. I really mean it.
No, I don't want you to go to the police. There were other people. Why should you be the only one involved?
But I am involved. We are all involved. Mom, a kid was killed tonight.
This is all going too fast
You
for
better
me,
give
son.
me something You better give me something fast.
Jimmy, you're very young. A foolish decision now could wreck your whole life. In 10 years, you'll never know this even happened.
Dad, answer her.
Stand up! You want to kill your own father?
I love it. I'm ready.
That was released in October 1955, October 27th, if memory serves. Not that it really matters, but that was the year and the time. And now, before we get into sort of everything around not only the movie, but its release, which is more significant than a lot of other movies you talk about, I thought it right to address right up front that we share a little bit of history with this movie. And so I'd like to hear you tell the story. Anthony, how did you first come to discover Rebel Without a Cause?
Well, I remember when we first met and started discovering our similar love of movies, we used to do this kind of game where, was it like once a week we'd give each other a movie to watch?
It was once a week. I think a couple of times we tried it twice a week. I don't recall exactly, but we had a screenwriting class together, and a lot of times we would just have a lot of extra time to just chat. So we thought, why don't we like give each other homework, and fun homework too?
Exactly, yeah. And this was one of the one of the ones you suggested to me. And I think out of all of the ones you suggested to me, I like this one the most. I love this movie. I was surprised how much I loved it, and it was I really good recommendation, Sam.
I was always very proud of it. Yeah, it's we a lot of times our tastes do not align, so that's it was good to find one that we both really liked, and that was not long after I first saw it, and I cannot for the life of me remember why, but it was just that first year of college, I was just watching movies like a maniac, the most activity that I've ever watch movies with.
Yeah, I remember you would come to class like, oh yeah, I watched 2 movies this morning. Well, I did. It's 8 a.m.
It was upwards of like 4 or 5 a day. It was ludicrous.
Yeah,
there are times when I wish I could go back to that, but hey, it's all just a function of time.
I mean, I've gone back to it during this quarantine. I've watched like 4 or 5 movies a day. I've been enjoying that part.
Yeah, there's so much. There's just so much of cinema to explore, and it can be daunting sometimes. But I just love how much of it there is, and
you'll never run out.
Never ever. I defy anyone to run out. That maybe you could have done it in like 1937. Maybe you could have seen every movie ever at that time. Not as much anymore, but again, that's just what makes it so this art form so unique is the specific journeys we take. And I remember it was that first year of college. I was just watching a ton. I'd already seen a ton of classics, but there were obviously a ton that I haven't seen still to this day. There's a lot of holes in my education. And one day, just for whatever reason, I suppose, I decided to watch Rebel Without a Cause. I think I may have been on a bit of a Nicholas Ray bender, who's the director of this movie, very active throughout the 40s and 50s particularly, and had a lot of really great movies. I can't remember a single one that I didn't like, and this one is at least one of the top 2 most iconic and well-known. It's tied with In a Lonely Place. I don't know if you've ever seen, that's the Humphrey Bogart movie.
I have heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's really, really great. I was devastated that I could not fit it into the extra milestone schedule earlier this year, because it does qualify. It was released in 1950. Maybe we'll circle back around in 2025 and get back to it, but such time has not passed. And I remember it's one of those movies, and I think this is interesting, is that it's a movie that's very iconic in the sense that it literally spawned a lot of iconography, like visual markers, visual identifications of movie history. You think of the red jacket that James Dean wears, or the cars that they ride, or some of the lines even. But it's a movie I found that a lot of people have not actually gone back to watch. And there are a lot like this, many of which I've been sort of discovering on Extra Milestone, where the legacy has kind of superseded the movie to the point where some might think that the movie doesn't matter. And I think that's a damn shame, because this is a really great movie.
Yeah, when I go back and watch these like classics, I try to separate the reputation from the experience, because when they were released, there was no reputation. This was just a new movie starring this new star, James Dean and Natalie Wood. So when I watched it the first time, and this time, I guess, I was just like, let's just watch a movie right now. That's all we're doing. We're just watching a movie. Yeah. And it's just enjoyable. Like, it's a good movie. Like, even forgetting about, like, oh, they say this is one of the best ever. Yeah, okay, we'll see about that. Like, no, I don't do any of that. Like, it's just genuinely enjoyable to watch.
I think it's interesting what you bring up about how the legacy was not there already, because you're right. Like, no one could have known, but actually there was, this movie was actually kind of unconventional in the way it was released, because kind of the elephant in the room, this movie was released like less than a month after James Dean died tragically in a car accident. What happened was that they started filming this movie, and it was kind of just like a B movie thing that people didn't really think that much of it. And then in the midst of the photography, the movie East of Eden came out, directed by Elia Kazan, also starring James Dean, and was received very well. And they realized kind of midway through the production that, hey, wait a second, we've got something here. They were originally filming it in black and white. They actually reshot almost everything they had filmed in color. And man, I can't imagine this movie in black and white. Like, there's some black and white movies that I can't imagine in color. This is the opposite situation. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, just the jacket alone.
How do you think? Yeah, well, that's kind of the obvious like go-to. Just that, it's unlike anything else you've ever seen, and just the colors in this movie. How do you think this movie would have played in black and white? Like, if it was exactly the same, just without color.
Well, I think it definitely would have been a different experience. I think the color helps bring out some of the differences of the youth, because this is right when color was first becoming more emphasized and more encouraged. So I think it's natural for a movie starring mostly young people, about the young person experience, being in color, kind of shedding light on that experience. And I think a black and white film it might have even just faded into the background of a lot of the other movies of that time if it was just black and white.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I love what you said about the way that it really kind of drives home the divide between parent and child, which is very much about what this movie is about. Not even like multiple generations, this specific generation, and the kids, the youth at the time, and the parents. And I think if it were in black and white, that would have definitely come across. Like, it would be hard not to. This is not a particularly subtle movie, and not that that's a bad thing, but that's just kind of the tone that it's going for. But it just hammers it home that much further, and I think it definitely would have faded into obscurity if that were the case, and that we would all have been worse off for it. And now this is 1955. I think it's worth noting that the 50s are often cited as the decade that, for lack of a better explanation, kind of started viewing teenagers as real people. You know what I'm saying? Like, before this, there were kids and adults. There wasn't really a transition point. Matter of fact, if a teenager showed up in a movie, they were often just kind of pigeonholed in with the kids. Whereas this is very specifically about the teenage experience, and specifically of the 1950s, what it means to be like just tasting freedom and yet never getting it, and how frustrating that is, and how dangerous that can be. And this is a really just kind of a sad, regretful movie. And I love the way that contrasts with the bright colors, with the vibrant imagery. And so that is yet another reason that we kind of lucked out without knowing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It reminds me of a movie, and I feel like I bring this movie up all the time, but I just saw it earlier this year, and it kind of blew my mind. It was, and I ruin the pronunciation every time, so I'm just going to acknowledge that right up front. It is Agnes Varda's Le Bonheur, which translates to happiness, and it has a very similar approach, tonal approach, I should say, in the way that the imagery is vibrant and the story is told and delivered in such a way that seems like it's just kind of a lighthearted melodrama, when actually it's a really deeply troubling story of adultery and jealousy and just existential dread. And that movie has just been on my mind since I saw it like 6 months ago. So do check that one out. I believe it's on the Criterion channel. It's different. It's about a different thing than this movie, but it does it in the same way, which I think is neat. Anthony, I wanted to ask, so what do you think it is about this movie? We've already touched on it a little bit, but imagine, if you will, this is 1955, October of 1955, and paired with the fact that James Dean just died a month ago, completely unexpectedly and tragically, 24 years old, way too soon, and you're seeing this movie, and let's say you're a teenager. What do you think it is about this movie that might connect so harshly in the way it did?
Well, I think it's about angst, but it's not pointless angst. It's not like, oh, those teenagers and their angst. Yeah. Everything has a purpose. There's no just blind. There's two sides. So like you have Natalie Wood's character's parents, right, where they're just like, oh, she's at that age, and then you have James Dean's father, who's like, I'm trying to understand. I'm trying here. I know you don't respect me, but I'm doing my very best to talk to you. And I think maybe that's what it was. Like when a teenager sees that they're being represented, like, oh, hey, I've felt that way. You know, it's a very specific, like, oh, isn't that nice? We're not being shrugged off this time, you know?
Mm-hmm. I recall very starkly, and that's not a pun on James Dean's character's name, Jim Stark, but I remember very viscerally the first time I watched this movie. Right at the beginning of the movie, what happens is that James Dean is drunk and is just sort of scurrying around the streets. I forget the actual verb, but is just sort of walking around and stuff, and is brought into a police station or a juvenile hall or something of that nature, and eventually gets to talk one-on-one with some kind of a therapist or an officer or something of that nature, and is just talked to as a person for what we can tell is kind of the first time in a very long time, if not forever. And the guy says, well, here, why don't you hit something? Why don't you hit the desk? And you can tell that is just such a moment of relief, such a release. And the simple fact is that there's just not enough places to do that. There are not enough places in the world of this movie and the real world, I think, where people of all ages, but especially teenagers, can just kind of let their guard down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I really wish we could have seen more of that character, because that scene was kind of the first scene where I realized, oh, this is a little different than what I was expecting. Mm-hmm. I really love that opening scene. I think drunk James Dean is hysterical, and I think I think that scene does a great job of establishing all of our main characters, right? And that moment he has where he's hitting the desk, and it doesn't really help, but it gives him a release in that moment. Like, right, he's like, okay, there's something more I need to deal with right now, because I just gave it to this desk and I'm still angry.
Yeah. And this is the same sequence where he says possibly the most iconic line in the movie, just sort of yells in a moment of unbridled frustration, "You're tearing me apart," which Tommy Wiseau would pay homage to in the room. Some people say James Dean walked so Tommy could run. I respectfully disagree. James Dean ran so Tommy could ascend. So I'm just going to leave that right there.
I mean, I'll say I thought that's one of the most iconic parts of it. Like I've known about that line before I ever even watched the movie, and I thought it was kind of hammy the first time I heard of it. And then when I watched the scene in context when he's drunk, I'm like, okay, he's drunk. That's not because that's not how people talk. They don't just. It's not a soap opera where you just stand up, tearing me apart. Like I think him being drunk in that scene, because like what's the saying? Sober thoughts are drunk actions. Like that is like that scene is one of my favorites in the movie because of that interaction. And I think it's his dad who's like, his mom's freaking out and his dad goes, "He's just loaded, honey." And like I just laughed for like 5 minutes like that. And then he's wandering around, he's knocking on the glass window, he looks at Play-Doh, he says, "Hey, why did you take my jacket, man?" Like I don't know why I love that scene so much this time.
Yeah, it's it kind of really encapsulates this entire character, and maybe even by extension the entire teenage experience, where there are all these things going on, all these like personal relationships. Hell, like school is barely even brought up in this movie. That would have just been the cherry on top. But there are so many things you're dealing with at this time in your life, at like a greater volume than you ever had before. And because it's the first time you're dealing with this many things, it feels like the end of the world. It feels like, how will I ever get used to this? And so that is why we just get so many, I'll say, rash decisions that are made in this movie. One of them resulting in a guy's death. Like a teenager dies in this movie. I remember watching that and being amazed, A, that like the production code would allow it, and B, that it was in this movie, which I guess it was just an example of, I'd been led to believe that it was a different kind of movie. By who, I couldn't quite say, but it's just one of those things where you hear about this movie and then you actually watch it and see what it is, and it's a lot different. And to the point where I think part of the reason it's so good is because of when it was released. Like if this movie, same basic plot and everything, if it were released today, I think it's fair to say we wouldn't really think much of it. But that's because we've seen so many like it. This was kind of the revolutionary aspects of this movie. Like you can see it, you can practically see it happening as you're watching the movie.
Yeah, you can see this movie has been made 100 times since it's been made. And it's been made poorly 1,000,000 times too. Like they see like this movie, so many people thought they were as cool as James Dean after this movie came out. Like, and so many writers thought they could come up with characters as interesting, and they couldn't. They hone in on the angst and the silent type, and they forget that he's not. He's sincere. He's not faking it. Mm-hmm. He's not hiding from everyone, and he's not quiet because he wants to be cool. He's just like, I don't know anyone here. I'm just trying to walk to class. I didn't know I shouldn't step on that seal. Sorry, buddy. And like that's another like little interaction I think kind of sets this movie apart from its kind of copiers, where I think a lot of times movies want to get that character, the James Dean type character, in an altercation right away. It's like, hey buddy, what did you mean to walk on that? And then it automatically becomes a big thing. But in this movie, that altercation lasts 20 seconds.
Yep.
But he goes, "Hey man, sorry, I didn't know." And then the bully's like, "All right, you know where you're going? Go to this room." And it's over like that. And it's just a little tiny details that people have exaggerated ever since then. Like the amount of school bully scenes that I just can't stand in schools. This movie has none of those, except for the knife fight. But that was kind of
right. Yeah, I was gonna say that's not to say that there aren't other altercations, but they're not where you would expect in seeing movies that have come out since. And I think that's really where we talked about him a lot, but for a reason. I think that's really where James Dean shines, is without very many words, mostly through actions and just kind of a general aura, is able to communicate that feeling of just kind of being a little lost, but also just waiting to see what happens, hoping that nothing bad does, and like ready to take on the world, but not necessarily knowing how to. And it's a lot of really difficult balances that he's managing to strike, and it's a damn shame that he never got to do more work. I watched last night just because I figured why not. I actually watched East of Eden, which is also on HBO Max in addition to Rebel Without a Cause, and that's yet another performance that is really just a wonderful portrayal of kind of what a lot of youths at the time were feeling, and to see this person on screen who understands it must have been really powerful. I haven't seen Giant yet, which is James Dean's last movie, so I will make sure to get around to that eventually, especially because it'll be eligible for Extra Milestone next year. And there was a scene actually in this movie. I can't recall exactly when it takes place in the story, but it's when James Dean's father, who's played by, let's see here, I always forget actor names, Jim Backus, is talking to Jim Stark, James Dean, and says this line that is accidentally really poetic, where he's saying like, in 10 years, will any of this matter? And here he is talking to James Dean, who had already been killed by the time this movie came out. So it's kind of this accidentally really poignant line about the way that, I'm not going to say parents specifically, but a lot of adults sort of condescend to teenagers, and they assume this position of like, I made it through the time period you're at now, and I turned out all right. Like, does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm kind of generalizing a little bit, but that is kind of the sense I get.
Yeah, I think it's his dad's not shrugging it off. It's more of a, I remember getting through it. I'd like to help you get through it, but for somehow I guess I forgot how I got through it. And I think that's kind of pretty relatable to a lot of parents, because if every parent remembered how they felt as a teenager, there wouldn't be any, of these silly arguments they have. And I think a lot of it really, their relationship is one of my favorites in the movie, because it's not just the standard kind of boring, oh, my parents don't get me, like, so therefore I'm going to act out. He's trying. All parties involved are trying to talk and understand. And his mom's a little outside. She's like, why can't you just listen? I'm trying to move. And then the scene where he calls her out is like, don't use me as an excuse anymore. We can't, you're not going to make me move this time. Like, I was like, this movie has balls, man. Like, there's that surprised me and it shocked me and I liked it. It was like, this is not this movie's trying to accomplish something, which is more than I can say for most movies that have like ripped this movie off.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One thing that I noticed while rewatching it this time is that with very few exceptions, if any, every interaction that a child has with their parent or an adult, just in general, it always comes from a place of the adult trying to correct the child. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's this assumption that we are always in the right because we have more wisdom. And while that is true, they have been around for longer, they do know more about the world, they're also failing to grasp the value of empathy. And I think there are a lot of the greatest movies are about this, about just sort of saying, please listen, and don't approach it trying to prove that you're right. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Like, it's very much the case of like literally just listen. It's that simple. Like, one of my favorite Simpsons jokes is joking about this movie, and they're watching a trailer for like a ripoff of this movie, and then it's like, oh, this Jimmy, he's in a motorcycle gang and they're being crazy. And then the dad character, who like literally is a spoof of the dad character in this, he has an apron on. He's like, he's a rebel, Ginny. He's a rebel without a cause. And it's just like
roll credits. Yeah.
I can just picture, that's how I bet, like I'm sure many adults were just like, well, this James Dean kid, what a jerk. He's just listen to your parents, kid, and everything will be fine. Like, no matter how specific and not subtle this movie can be, I bet a lot of people still didn't get that, hey, maybe I should go listen to my teenagers.
Yeah, exactly. They're going through a lot, and a lot of times all they need is just like a pair of ears, so to speak. And I think it's worth noting that a lot of the more relaxed scenes in this movie take place in those areas, like I said before, where they feel like they can let their guard down. I think specifically, not so much with this one, but there is a sense in the early scene in the planetarium where they're just sort of going on a field trip and they're just sort of screwing around, joking around, having fun with each other. And it does, of course, lead to a conflict, but there's a moment where they're just kind of getting to be themselves. You know, they're in a darkened room and they're relatively isolated, and you can tell that they're feeling a lot of freedom in this moment. And I think this is sort of expounded upon later in the movie, where they Sal Mineo and Natalie Wood and James Dean end up finding like an old abandoned mansion, which I found this out just before recording. That's the same mansion that they filmed the movie Sunset Boulevard at, which is
nice.
Which was brought up actually a lot in the conversation about All About Eve. So keep sneaking into this episode, you Sunset Boulevard, you. And yeah, I love what you said just now about sort of the way the perspective changes completely depending on what age you're at. It reminds me, and I might regret doing this because it's actually going to be an extra milestone in a few weeks, but it reminds me of something that Roger Ebert said about the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where when Ebert was younger, he found himself relating to Jack Nicholson's character a lot more, just sort of, the renegade, the rebel, causing trouble. And then when he got older, started connecting to Nurse Ratched a lot more, and the frustration with having to deal with just this id unleashed on the world. And it got me to thinking about the title of this movie, Rebel Without a Cause. I think it's clear to see that from the perspective of the movie, it is something of a facetious title. It's saying that actually there is plenty of cause, and we see that throughout the movie, but it may appear to the adults as if it's for no reason. And I think that's what this movie is kind of really trying to expose. What do you make of kind of the subtext of the title?
Well, I think a lot of this movie relies on the interactions between the kids, the teenagers, and how they interact with each other. Mm. And I'm just thinking about it. There aren't many movies of that time where it's just that, where it's not supposed to be, like most of the time it's just them walking home from school or something, but we're seeing them hanging out. We're seeing them have fun. We're seeing them get into fights.
Yeah.
And there are, I think of movies like Diner or American Graffiti that are similar to this. A Bronx Tale, my favorite movie.
I was thinking about Dazed and Confused while watching this.
Exactly, like just kind of there's the kind of nothingness of what they're talking about. They're just with each other. They're just hanging out, and sometimes they get a little rowdy, and that's when the parents come out and they tell them to, hey, knock it off, you kids. Now, that's a little more justified in this one when they were having a knife fight. Maybe a parent should step in on that one. But
yeah.
Like the quiet moments, like you said, where you have a moment to breathe. There were a couple that really stood out to me that I think has the subtext that you're talking about. Where the first one is right before they're about to do that chicken driving game, and Buzz and Jimmy are just walking. And Buzz literally says, like, this is after the knife fight, after they've been stabbing each other. He says, I like you. And then they get in their cars.
Yeah.
And then they're like, let's do this. And then they start driving. And then Buzz, his arm gets caught in the thing. And then he's dead. And there's Jimmy jumps out. and he's rolling, and he's like, whoa. He's just kind of taking it in. I just did that. I jumped. I lost. But he's laughing. When everybody runs up to the edge, he's thinking, haha, they're running up to see the cars that just exploded at the bottom. He's laughing. He's actually laughing. He goes, hey, where's Buzz? And then some random guy goes, down there. And then he stops laughing. And what that scene stood out to me because this probably would have started a friendship. Like they jumped out of if they both had jumped out of their cars, they would have, haha, you're the loser. Anyway, that was pretty fun, wasn't it? And then that would have been it. Like, because he was like James Dean, who's supposed to be like this moody guy. He's like, hey, wasn't that fun? That was kind of neat, huh? And then he's, of course it's all torn away a few moments later. But like, I think that's kind of the subtext of how they were literally enemies a few minutes ago, and then this experience of that obviously is dangerous no matter what. But if it had turned out better, they most likely would have been friends. And then I think that is mirrored later on, when him and James Dean and Natalie Wood are having their alone time moment after they leave Plato to have his nap. Yeah, they're talking about what love means and how they're feeling. Oh, so this is what it's really like. And I think like that is, I think that's supposed to speak, yes, to teenagers, but I think it's mostly to the parents. Like it's not supposed to speak to them, but it's supposed to make them realize that teenagers are capable of having these thoughts, and they're capable of like, they're not just existing. They're going, like, their life has begun. They're no longer just hanging out. They're falling in love. They're making friends. Their futures are being laid out in front of them. And maybe we should slow down a minute and listen to them.
Exactly. Yeah. They are confused. They are dealing with a lot, but that does not neglect the nuance that is in their minds. And that's something that literally any teenager will attest to. I defy anyone to find a teenager that doesn't agree.
Exactly. And like, it's not like teenagers can't be dumb and dramatic, but like there's also so much, truth in these moments.
Yeah. And I was actually going to mention, what I thought you were going to say with the way the scene is mirrored is, and I only just put it together a moment ago, but that when James Dean gets out of the car and starts laughing, I only just realized it mirrors the ending of the movie and spoiler alert, we're talking about the whole movie, when Plato is shot and it's at the same place, it's at the planetarium, and he just starts laughing. Like that's all he can do. He just starts, seeing like, oh, look at that. Look at the two different colored socks and stuff. And that is just kind of really this movie in a nutshell, is the way that there is so much frustration and angst, for lack of a better word, that sometimes the only resolution is one of aggression. Like that's why the knife fight takes place earlier. That's why they engage in a drag race. That's why there's so much yelling and lashing out, is because there's nowhere else for those emotions to go. They have to go somewhere. And this movie is a really, really great example of this. And just going back to what we were talking about a second ago, the way, those moments of peace, I think that's something that a lot of the quote hangout movies, they don't, a lot of them at least that I've seen, they're not necessarily going for the same kind of dichotomy, like this is where the chaos is, but then we can sort of retreat to what Jeff Goldblum would call like a sweet, sweet sanctuary of the soul. Like there's not that sort of divide between the safe places and the unsafe places. And that's something that I think was really revolutionary about this movie, and is part of the reason why a lot of others just aren't as good. I know we keep going back to this point, but it's worth repeating. It feels like in a lot of similar movies now, everywhere is unsafe, and that's just not realistic, at least in the way they're depicting it. So I think they could stand to take that lesson from this movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of lessons in this movie, and it's a very thoughtful movie. It's very specific in its, most of it takes place over that one night. And I think there's a lot that can just be taken in and appreciated about kind of the intention here.
Yeah. And just, going back to it, there's just one last thing about this movie that I really love, and it's that, again, the mirroring between the two scenes that take place at the planetarium, the observatory at Griffith Park, where the first one is very relaxed, very kind of freeing, a little bit of a respite from just all the stress in the world. And then the next time we go there is literally life and death. And it just shows how places change with our experiences with them. And so this is a very, very wise movie. And so I'm really glad that we got to discuss it.
Yeah. I always love talking about my favorite movies, and this is definitely one of them. It's like, I've only seen it twice, but both times I get something different out of it. And it's very, it's very impactful every time.
Yeah, I don't think it would make like my top 10 of the 1950s, but it's definitely way up there. And I think it's certainly one of the defining movies of that decade and that era.
Yeah, it might be in my top 10 of the 50s.
Yeah,
and that's also just like, I'm a big fan of like James Dean and Natalie Wood, just as actors in general. Like Natalie Wood is one of my favorite actresses of all time. So like, I just like seeing her in movies. So I'm sure that's also part of my rating.
Yeah. And it's just, just such a damn shame that Natalie Wood, another actor who died way too early. Like she still had, she lived a few more decades, but even still, it's kind of this accidental, tragic poetry to this. And yeah, I just love the way that her character transitions from, being willing to join in the ridicule for James Dean.
I mean, like she was a full on jerk in the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then by the end, I'm like,
which way the school is.
Yeah. Like she was like fully just shut up, Natalie, in the beginning. Like she was just I was not rooting for her. But as she progresses, as we see her relationship with her father, and we see how she reacts to Buzz dying, and we see how she reacts to Plato and Jimmy, and how their friendship has grown. And how she, like we almost see in real time her character fall in love with Jimmy, and it's very like she's just very captivating in this movie.
I think everyone's very captivating in this movie, and that's part of what makes it so great. And so definitely one of the great movies about being young and about growing older. So I think that's fair to say. Anthony, I wanted to ask, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to give about Rebel Without a Cause? Any other observations or maybe similar movies or anything like that?
I mean, I was thinking about similar movies. I already mentioned a couple of them: American Graffiti, Diner, A Bronx Tale. A recent movie I would say is Brooklyn with Saoirse Ronan.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think they have a similar, in terms of the relationship between the two characters. I think they have a similar pacing, and just because it's fun. Fun fact: Fry from Futurama, based on James Dean look in this movie. That's always one of my favorite facts. Since I've seen Futurama a million times, I was thinking about Fry through most of the movie. But yeah, just I love the movie. It's very poetic. It's very affecting, and I like it's heavy, but it's also just it's just enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it's one that definitely deserves to be sought out rather than just sort of acknowledged as iconic, which it is, but also like actually watch The Thing. I think that's definitely something I would recommend doing.
Exactly. And watch The Thing. That's the best way to go about it.
Also watch The Thing by John Carpenter, which is a very good movie. But
exactly.
That's completely beside the point. I just thought of it. I just want to give a recommendation real quick. It's actually a movie that came out this year in the midst of the pandemic via streaming and stuff. One of my favorite movies of the year, also a high school movie. It's called To the Stars, starring Kara Hayward from Moonrise Kingdom. And it's a very, very different movie tonally, but I think it's getting at a lot of the same things about that empathy, and it is just remarkably stylish. I love the look of this movie, and it's one of the few high school movies that I really, really loved. Like, not even just liked, I loved this thing. So I believe that's on Hulu now. So check that out if you can.
I haven't even, I think I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it anywhere. Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out.
I really dig it. And I think with that, I believe that we can do our whole sign-off shtick. So, Anthony, why don't you let the listeners know where can they find you online? Where can they keep an eye out for what you're up to?
Well, I'm on Letterboxd. I got that's where I log and review movies, and then I'll just because I'm here. I'm directing a short film that it's called Briar County, and we have an Instagram. You can just search Briar County, and that's going to be on. We're going to put that in the film festival circuit in the next few months. So maybe by the next time I'm on this show, it'll be finished, and I can tell you where to find it. But as of right now, we're still shooting it. But it'll probably end up being on YouTube, Vimeo, and anywhere else we can put it. So
that's awesome.
Punch that up.
And what was just to clarify for anyone wondering, what was the spelling on that?
B-Y. Wait, hold on. Now I forgot how to spell. It's gone through like 15 title changes. We're still in early production. Yeah, B-R-Y-A-R County.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, definitely keep an eye on that. I know a lot of the other crew members, and I know that they'll turn out something real nice. I'm also on Letterboxd, just by name, Sam Nolan. Same deal, log everything I watch. I'm also on Twitter at NolandSam. That's where I tweet things, which is what Twitter is for. So that's the deal with that.
You don't say.
I do say, as a matter of fact. And I host this show every week. I also host Game Over, Man, and a nice place to visit on the Cinemaholics Patreon for as low as $2 a month. You can come hang out with us, talk about the Alien and Predator movies and The Twilight Zone with Adonis Gonzalez and I. And I think, to quote this slugline from our old podcast, that's all we got. I'm Sam.
I'm Anthony.
And we'll catch you on the next Extra Milestone.